Looks like we got a couple more people coming in, so we'll just wait another minute or so before we start. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Chaucer's Books virtual author discussion, I should say poets discussion, with David Starkey and Paul Willis. My name is Michael Takeuchi, and I'm the events coordinator at Chaucer's Books, a 47-year-old independent bookstore located in Santa Barbara, California, which is owned by our founder, Mari Curley. To purchase tonight's books, browse other titles, or check out our upcoming events, please go to our website at chaucersbooks.com. Speaking of events, we have a full slate coming up over the next couple months before we hunker down for the holiday season. We're starting next week. We bring on local authors Lawrence Spann, who's going to talk about his fiction work, Parable of Lies, and Lauren Schneider will talk about her book, Therapy. We're also pleased to bring on celebrated YA author Sharon Cameron, a Reese Witherspoon selected author, to talk about her latest novel, Blooper. Following that, we have a couple offsite in-person events first for young writing sensation Bea Bleidner on October 21st at UCSB. Her book, If You Lived Here, You'd Be Famous by Now, has hit the country by storm. And following that, on the 24th, our friends at Crush Bar will co-host an event with U.S. Representative Adam Schiff for his book signing of Midnight in Washington. The following month, we're also pleased to host an in-person event for none other than the great Susan Orlean, and we'll also have events for locals, Mary Dora, David Gersh, and Ginny Weber. So please join us. Please check it out at chaucersbooks.com. While our guests and I are the only ones seen and heard on this webinar, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function during the program. But at the suggestion of our two poets, we will bring those who would like to discuss onto the screen after the main portion of this program. Tonight's event is being simulcasted on and recorded for our YouTube channel and will be available to view after program's completion. YouTubers, please post your questions for David and Paul in the chat, and I will be monitoring. So let's begin. Tonight, I'm so pleased to welcome Paul Willis and David Starkey. First, we want to bring out Paul. Paul, how are you doing?
Just fine, Michael. Thank you.
Paul Willis is a professor of English at Westmont College. In addition to Somewhere to Follow, he has published 6 previous collections of poetry, an eco-fantasy novel, The Alpine Tales, a YA Elizabethan time travel novel, All in a Garden Green, and the essay collections Bright Shoots of Everlastingness and To Build a Trail. He was the Santa Barbara Poet Laureate from 2011 to 2013 and hosts an annual reading in Los Padres National Forest to honor the life and work of the late poet William Stafford. Check out his work at pauljwillis.com. Paul's new book is Somewhere to Follow, which is available, of course, at Chaucer's. Also, we would like to bring out David Starkey. Come on out, David. There you are. David Starkey, welcome. David served as Santa Barbara's Poet Laureate from 2009 to 2011. He is the founding director of the creative writing program at Santa Barbara City College and the publisher and co-editor of Gunpowder Press. Over the past 30 years, he has published 10 full-length collections of poetry with small presses, and more than 500 poems in literary journals such as American Scholar, Georgia Review, Prairie Schooner, and Southern Review. As an educator, he has written, edited a number of books, most recently Hello Writer, and Creative Writing, 4 Genres in Brief, the 4th edition. Both of those were published by Bedford and St. Martin's in 2021. David is also a founding editor of the California Review of Books, and he's the host of Santa Barbara's Creative, I got cut off there. So Santa Barbara's Creative
Community,
I apologize. Well, welcome both of you guys. I am so pleased to have you on. I wish it was in person. About a year and a half ago, we were planning a big event with all the poets laureate, with Enid and Sojourner, Perry, and everybody. It just didn't happen because of this darn COVID thing. And I'm just wondering, how are you guys holding out in this time, and how are you able to write and create?
Well,
Go ahead, David.
no, I was deferring to you.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I do feel the separation from some of the other poets in the community who I see more often virtually. I will say that, the outdoors is the most COVID-free place you can be. And my wife and I have spent time in the Sierra, which curiously enough is more crowded than it usually is. But I found that we found that people are extraordinarily happy to be out and generous to each other instead of feeling crabby that other people are taking their campsite kind of thing. So that's been a little silver lining. The outdoors are still there, and it's beautiful as ever.
And David?
Well, before I retired this past June, I found the experience overwhelming. But now that I have a little bit more free time, I'm actually finding the my keyboard to be a pretty creative place right now.
Well, I'm glad you both did. I mean, David, you produced 2 books, and Paul, you produced this beautiful hardcover. And I should also mention that Lorraine Boslar is out there too, as a former poet laureate. So thank you for joining us. I see Enid out there too as well, and I hope to bring you guys on at the end of the show. Wow, this is great that you're managing to stay so creative. And what I'm gonna do is just get off and enjoy the words. So Paul has agreed to go first. He'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then David will come on. So come on out.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to be with you. I'm actually not at home in Santa Barbara. My wife and I are down with our daughter and son-in-law in Orange County. And our daughter had a baby girl at noon today. So we're tired and rejoicing. And I'm actually here in the nursery they've fixed up. So I think you can see a crib behind me. It's not occupied yet. Everyone's still at the hospital. So thinking of being in the womb, I'll start with a poem in which I'm in the womb. My father was a summer ranger naturalist at Big Basin Redwood State Park near Santa Cruz. He was most proud of leading singing at the campfire programs back in the 50s. Often told us about that. So I'm trying to imagine what my own family of origin was like just before I was born. Here's the poem, Campfire Program. There in front of the fire circle, in your big brimmed ranger hat, you stand at ease, arms waving, hundreds of voices into song under the flashing redwood trees. On top of Old Smoky, oh my darling, she'll be coming round the mountain. And the singers in their plaid flannel shirts, their pedal pushers, roasted marshmallows still sticky upon their fingers, all swell in time and in tune. As your palm now makes invisible triangles in air, lofting the measures to the stars. This is America in the 50s, relieved to be quit of the good war and proud to have won it, and glad to have issued from their roomy canvas tents parked next to their automobiles. And look there, Ranger, your young wife from the Orange Grove is sitting on the split log bench in the front row. Your 2-year-old pulling on her sleeve. Your young wife who is tired and queasy and 4 months pregnant with me and about to come down with polio, though she does not know it, and neither do you. She is gazing at you with admiration, and you think, yes, oh, my darling, one more verse, folks, and just the women this time. Well,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to ask, I'm not going to come back on again, but since of what happened at Big Basin, this seemed to have much more a deeper meaning because of the fire danger involved. And I wanted you to talk about that. Before that, I'd like to mention that Chris Yost is also here, a former poet laureate. So welcome. But if you could talk a little bit about that, then I'm just going to shut up.
Okay, Michael. Well, of course, I think it's a couple years ago that Big Basin was badly burned in a fire and the historic buildings were taken out. This campfire circle in the poem, which seated 1,000 people, was completely burned. And that was a bit of a heartbreak for my father. So there's a sense in which this poem is not only nostalgic, but elegiac at the moment because of that fire. With a father who's a ranger, you'd think I would have slipped right into the outdoors in an accomplished way, but here's a poem about my first backpack trip, 53 years ago in the Sierra. It's called 12. When I was 12, I snarled my uncle's fishing line inside his reel so badly that he had to cut it with a knife. Not just snip it cleanly off, but slice the entire mess apart. This was on the meadow lip of Graveyard Lakes, a day's hike into the Silver Divide. There were other indignities as well. The mosquitoes that feasted on my rear when I dropped my drawers to do my duty. The mule that out of nowhere sprouted the biggest erection I'd ever seen. The other 2 boys who couldn't stop laughing whenever I ran to my uncle and cried, "Uncle Earl, Uncle Earl." One evening, the other men asked me to fill up a cook pot in the spring. I found a little creek by camp and climbed, but could not find where it came bubbling out of the ground. So an hour later, I came back with an empty pot. "I couldn't find a spring," I said. And then I learned they had only meant the creek itself. And the 2 boys laughed and laughed at me. "Uncle Earl," they sang together, "Uncle Earl." But that is what it means to be 12 and scared and clumsy and misinformed, with an uncle who wants to have your back but doesn't know how, because 12 is 12 and doesn't get better for a while, for a very long time, in fact. I just wanted to be in my bedroom where I could read about King Arthur and his knights who rode into the dark forest and always found clear bubbling springs and silver fountains right where they were supposed to be, bubbling clear out of the ground. Well, I should have told you that my book, Somewhere to Follow, is split into 4 sections. The first section's called Then, and these 2 poems, Campfire Program and 12, came out of that section. I think I'll read 2 poems each if I have time from the next 3 sections. So we go from then quite cleverly to now, and then we go from near to far. So the 4 sections are then, now, near, far. So let's go to now. My mother-in-law passed away just 3 years ago. We were taking her ashes up to Grass Valley near Sacramento to be buried in the family plot there. And things were a little tense in the car for some reason. I don't know if that ever happens to those of you who are married, but this poem's called Subject to Dust. So says the diamond warning sign in the broad valley beneath the barren Tembler Range. And sin, George Herbert would add. Inside the car, my wife is giving me the business for sticking to the speed limit of 55 miles an hour, a parade of pickups on our bumper. In the back seat, a box full of her mother's ashes. Later, when it is her turn to drive, I'll resist when she asks me to read aloud and then reply to every text that pings her phone. Toward evening, she insists I call our B&B to tell them we'll be an hour late because of Sacramento traffic. Here, she says, this is the number, pointing to the screen while keeping one eye on the road. So I dial and dutifully say, we'll soon be late. I mean, we'll be there later than we hoped, but soon enough. Please save our spot. There is a pause, and a very gracious woman tells me I have called the mortuary. Well, that sent us into laughter and broke the tension in the car, so that was a good thing, as embarrassing as it was. Here's a little poem called Thy Necessity. Our friend Greg was 2 weeks shy of his lingering end when he called to say he was so sorry we had lost our golden retriever. You see, he had lost a retriever himself and knew the private pain of it. Then there was John, my former colleague, who, when given his own death sentence, found a way to console the young oncologist, telling her what a good job she had done and how he was sure it must have been hard to share the news. How to account for such men, such moments? Deflection? Denial? That, of course, but something deeper and truer as well. Sir Philip Sidney, mortally wounded in the thigh at Zutphen, handed his canteen of water to the soldier sprawled beside him in the field and said, for pity of his groans, thy necessity is yet greater than mine. Michael mentioned that I host an annual reading in honor of William Stafford at the Civilian Public Service Camp out on Paradise Road, where he served during World War II as a conscientious objector. But apparently, whenever Stafford approached the drinking fountain and someone else was coming up to drink, he would step aside and quote Sir Philip Sidney and say, thy necessity is yet greater than mine. Not a bad rule to live by. Well, let's skip to the third section, which is near, as in the Santa Barbara area. Here's a poem about a walk in the Montecito on Mountain Drive, actually. called True Wilderness. Today, as I walked, for some strange reason, I stayed on the road instead of taking the path when it came. Am I getting so old that the asphalt is now a comfort? But what if I trust it like a trail? Look around at the red eucalyptus, the stream pooling and purling below. Each car that passes holds at least one questing soul. And the bicycle riders, the way they lean into the curves as their tires spin with such precision, even these are part of natural history. So I let my feet ponder the pavement. I take my time deep in the wilderness of this world. Seems like 3 or 4 years back, the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History hosted some of us as poets in residence for a few months at a time. We were just supposed to spend time at the museum and its grounds and see what we wanted to write about. And so in the Hall of Native American Artifacts, there's a map of the county and surrounding areas, and it shows all the place names that are Chumash in origin, and there's lots of them. It amazed me. So I tried to put this into a poem. It's called Names of the Chumash. Just when you think the Indians of the central coast of California have disappeared out to sea, their names keep washing up on the beaches, dunes, and promontories. Pismo, Nipomo, Halama, Hueneme, Magoo, Malibu. The peaks stand up and word themselves. Chismahoo, Kachuma, Topa Topa, and the creeks and rivers and waterfalls keep flowing in their native tongue. Kuyama, Sisquak, Nahoe, Piru, Sespi, Matilaha. Even our towns speak ancestry. Lompoc, Ojai, Satakoy, and the avenues of our cities, they say Honata, tall oaks, Anapamu, rising place, Anacapa, island mirage. And don't forget our toxic landfill, sweet, forlorn Casmalia. Even when we try to bury the earth with garbage, we cannot bury the names. They haunt us still. They bless us. They keep us. They keep us always from forgetting, even when we have forgotten. You know, my favorite name in there is Chismahoo. I mean, it's so fun to say. It's a little peak behind Carpinteria. It's a peak that is the same height as the tallest peak on Santa Cruz Island, and the Chumash said that their goddess created that rainbow bridge between Santa Cruz Island and Chismahoo. They came to the mainland on. Well, the last section is called Far. Not too far, really. Just the Sierra. The Sierra seems like an exotic and far-flung place to me still. Was reading the Song of Solomon with some students at Westmont, and we thought we'd try to write some things in imitation. So I came up with this one called Yosemite Love Poem. And my wife Sharon and I actually met 43 years ago on a 10-day backcountry ski trip in Yosemite. So Yosemite is part of our love story. Yosemite Love Poem. Your breasts are like twin water wheels in the rush of the Tuolumne. Your knees are like young lodgepole pines bent under snow. Your toes are like smooth pebbles at the foot of Bridal Veil Falls, and your speech is like the curve of current at the brink. But what am I? More like the ashes underneath the old retired firefall. A squat Pacific chorus frog rack-acking from a granite crack. The bear who gets his paws immersed in pancake batter in the campground. You, the shapely curve of Half Dome. I, that missing half in air. Well, my last poem is from far away as Mammoth Lakes up on the east side of the Sierra. Those who know me know that I'm not very handy mechanically. It doesn't take much to scare and confound me. And we were renting a condominium there for a few days. And well, I just couldn't figure anything out. So this poem, and it'll be my last one, it's called Technical Condo. The barbecue on the balcony almost exploded at my touch, till I did get the wood stove working on the third try. One look at the directions for the remotes to the DVD, the television, the stereo, and I turned tail. And the microwave, with its panel of options, convinced me to eat my turkey cold. Even the lockbox on the door, with its combination and hidden levers, is enough to keep me standing outside with the stars. It is strangely beautiful out here. No instructions needed for the light to travel all this way. Thanks, everyone. And now let's listen to David.
Thanks, Paul. Wow, great reading. Loving to hear those poems. Again, I think I've heard quite a few of them. I'd love to hear them together as a group. So I'm going to start my timer to make sure that I don't go over my time. And I want to thank, first of all, my publishers of my two books, Diane Kistner at Future Cycle Press and Amy McCracken and Jessica Bell at Vine Leaves Press. So with Chris Yost, I am the co-editor of Gunpowder Press, and I know how much bringing poetry into the world is a labor of love. So I'm really grateful to Diane and Amy and Jessica and everyone else at Future Cycle and Vine Leaves who had a hand in publishing the two books I'm going to read from tonight, Dance You Monster to My Soft Song, and What Just Happened, 210 Haiku Against the Trump Presidency. And I guess I win the title for the longest, or win the prize for the longest titles. Thanks also Michael at Chaucer's, and I want to thank Scott too. I don't know if you're watching, but I really appreciate all you do for local authors. And thanks Paul for inviting me to join you tonight. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read from What Just Happened, 210 Haiku Against the Trump Presidency. And the book consists of one haiku for each week of Trump's presidency. And I'm going to actually read the whole last year, 2020, plus the final three haiku of 2021. But it will go by pretty quickly. So, you know, there were always a lot of really horrible things happening during the Trump presidency, just to kind of get you back what was happening at the beginning of 2020. The former president was sort of in the middle of his first impeachment trial. And of course, you know, COVID was just about to explode. Now, some of my haiku are direct quotes from Trump, and I followed the old-fashioned 5-7-5 pattern that I know a lot of haikuists eschew, but that was one way for me to kind of keep a sense of form with all this. I can't do a Trump impersonation, so I'm just going to kind of make a little bit of a weird face when I'm quoting Trump directly. And if I've timed this correctly, my reading from what just happened should take fewer than 10 minutes, and then I'll spend the remainder of my 20 minutes reading from Dance You Monster to My Soft Song. So here I go. "2020, winter. Orange makeup can't hide the fact that he now looks a million years old. Bolton will talk if the Senate subpoenas him. An empty offer. Ken Starr joins his team, the same Starr who said Clinton was a hypocrite. The first virus case in the United States, he says, we do have a plan. The Senate votes no witnesses. They've already made their decision. Rush Limbaugh receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Honest. He predicts it will become weaker with warm weather, then gone. Gone. The situation with the virus is very much under control. Within a couple days, it is going to be down close to zero. Spring. Anybody that wants a test can get a test. The tests are perfect. We're doing a great job with it. Just stay calm and it will go away. They think August. It could be July. A pause. Could be longer than that. By Easter Sunday, you will have packed churches all over our country. So with the mask, it's a voluntary thing. You don't have to do it. Looking at him, you can tell he's an expert at almost everything. Sweet, sweet pandemic that makes everyone watch him daily on TV. Ultraviolet light might knock this virus out and disinfect it. 1 million cases, 50,000 dead, time to open things back up. We can put out, I call them embers or a fire. We could put it out. In the ICUs, his devoted voters are drowning on dry land. He's heard a lot of good stories about this hydroxychloroquine. He's hunkered down in a bunker as protesters chant the name George Floyd. Summer. Is that his Bible he's holding at St. John's Church? Well, it's a Bible. That old man was an Antifa provocateur thrown down by the cops. His Tulsa rally, poorly attended. He blames no-shows on Kung Flu. He walks the border wall near Yuma. This thing of steel is beautiful. Russia financed hits by Taliban on US soldiers. No biggie. 3 million cases. Good time to withdraw from the WHO. A panel for folks positively impacted by law enforcement. The nightly Portland protests are worse, he reckons, than Afghanistan. Is there a reason the mail has suddenly stopped arriving on time? No religion, no anything. Hurt the Bible, hurt God. thus Biden. The polls, he assures his fanatic supporters, were wrong last time too. Such a great treatment, convalescent plasma. At least that's what he hears. Long lashes, long nails, batshit Kimberly Guilfoyle at the RNC. Cops who shoot unarmed suspects are like golfers who choke on a short putt. Fall. He's honored to get a Nobel Prize nod from a Norwegian fascist. This China virus was a big setback, but now we're back to business. Come one, come all to the super spreader event in the Rose Garden. Along with most of his staff, he tests positive for COVID-19. Virtual debates are not his forte. It's too hard to nonstop yell. Everywhere he goes, his crowds urge him to greater and greater outrage. He leaves the 60 Minutes set pissed. Leslie Stahl's questions were too hard. The gods love dark jest. Amy Coney Barrett in place of RPG. Biden wins. The Q plan fails. His swollen pumpkin head explodes, practically. He never said he would concede. In this regard, he's good as his word. And so the big steal begins, which he claims he wants to stop. Endless gall. This is a total fraud. The Department of Justice, well, maybe they're involved. Rudy's star witness, a drunk ex-stripper working freelance in IT. Winter. The Supreme Court is seemingly also involved in the cover-up. Repeat a big lie enough and it becomes true, said Joseph Goebbels. In sympathy with his fellow criminals, a flurry of pardons. The Secretary of State in Georgia is told, find the votes we need. 2021. At the Capitol, one last traitorous assault on democracy. Making history again, the first president to be impeached twice. Gone, like a piece of toilet paper wiped from the sole of someone's shoe. So that is the end of What Just Happened, 210 Haiku Against the Trump Presidency, a satire. And I'm going to turn now to Dance You Monster to My Soft Song. This is a title that comes from a painting by the Swiss artist Paul Klee. So, you know, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and I pictured necessity as an actual physical mother in this poem. Necessity. She broods in her dark, rambling house, and her brood takes its measure by her tone. Centuries may pass until they have sopped up every last drop of her bitterness. Then she sends them out into the unready world, singly like sin, the pair of anguish, the IQ test, books of divine whisperings, a cotton gin. So if you know my poetry, you know that I love to put incongruous things together. So in this poem, I've put the 7th century Saint Martin in a Dollar General store. It's called Saint Martin in Dollar General. Here he comes in his Roman soldier outfit, riding down the kitchenwares aisle, knocking over spatulas and oven mitts on a horse. Picture that, a horse in Dollar General. Gladware topples from the shelves. Rolls of aluminum foil spool in front of him as though it were Christmas. But it's not Christmas, it's July. What a mess. The manager tries to halt his progress, but he's turned up home decor. Now Mr. Ed is breaking mirrors and knocking assorted plastic lamps to the floor. Where is the miracle? Everyone wants to know. What is the meaning of this visitation? But St. Martin can't be bothered with wonders or explanations. He's too busy wrecking automotive, this fucking pony of his stomping on the windshield wiper fluid, kicking quarts of motor oil. So I'm lucky to have 3 fantastic children from my first marriage, but I have to say that the splitting up part wasn't very easy. This is a poem called Decapitations. Shortly after our divorce, my ex went through hundreds of family photographs and snipped off all my heads. There I am at Christmas, headless, and headless too at our daughter's birthdays and the backyard barbecue. Headless at Easter, bending down to grasp a purple egg, and headless in new fallen snow. She's also cut off my leg. She sent 3 bulky envelopes through the US mail, along with a 20-page letter that went into great detail about my many failings as a husband and a dad. You're lucky to be alive, she said. And indeed, I'm very glad. So I was born and raised in Sacramento, but my parents are from Louisiana and Texas. And every summer, my parents were public school teachers. They would leave as soon as school was out, and we would go down to the South, and we would stay until just before school started up again. So I sort of feel a little bit like I'm an honorary Southerner from having spent all my summers down there. This is a poem called Homemade Ice Cream. My grandmother peels, pits, and chops the bag of peaches, fresh from the Kroger on Laurel Avenue, pureeing them on her whirring blender, as my grandfather fills the sides of the hand-cranked ice cream maker with crushed ice and rock salt. Beaumont, Texas, 1968. The world is exploding, but my grandparents are doing their best to seal the change inside the black and white TV in their living room. Still, I can hear the music coming from the big ramshackle house behind theirs, loud and angry and not white at all. They fill the stainless steel canister with peaches, condensed milk, sugar, and vanilla. The long process begins. Everyone takes a turn, mom, dad, even my little sister who can barely grasp the handle. It seems to take forever. They are so poor, I will learn later, and so angry at their poverty. They say things about their neighbors, horrible things I do not want to repeat. And yet, on this July night, well past the pivot point of the American century, we are all laughing, clapping our hands when the mixture finally thickens enough to eat. It is so good. I can almost taste it 50 years later. So creamy, so rich, so sweet. Homemade ice cream. And I think I'm gonna finish up my portion of the reading before we go to our Q&A section with a poem in memory of Andre Levy, a local poet who spent the last years of her life in Santa Barbara. She was alive from 1959 to 2012. So this is in memory of Andre, and it's called Actively Passing. I took the kayak out this morning, though fog was rolling in, the wind was picking up, and a dissipating tropical storm made it difficult to launch into the break. Still, I wanted to be away from shore for an hour, to think about yesterday. The hospice nurse warned me before I went into your room, be prepared. Some people find it disturbing. But nighttime crickets were playing on your iPod. The room was comfortably dark, and friends had set up a sort of altar on the table by your bed. 2 candles, books of poetry, the sequin butterflies you gave as gifts to people you felt sorry for. Your pale face was all but hidden by a blanket. Your breathing labored and erratic. I'm sorry that I didn't stay for long. I felt too keenly the nurse's words, so apt for all of us, actively passing from our own lives when we should be rocking on the ocean waves. Thank you, and I'm gonna.
Wow, bravo, both of you. Thank you very much. I'm going to invite everyone to please, if you'd like to come out, I'm going to promote everyone who wants to speak to be panelists. But in the meantime, Lauren had a question for each of you. And this is for Paul. There's also compliments for you all, so please check the Q&A, both David and Paul. Okay, writing poems with tender humor is so difficult, and you have a most compelling knack for slightly tongue-in-cheek poems. Do you chuckle as you write them? And are they a way to avoid sentimentality, Paul?
Mm. Oh, thanks for that question, Laurent. I don't think of myself as being all that funny, and I don't write poems often with an intention to be funny, but it comes out. I guess, you know, we all, David talked about, you know, the incongruities in his poems, and I think any kind of humor rests in incongruities that we observe. As for sentimentality, I sure have my share of sentimental poems, and I can think of a poet who thinks a good poem just rides the razor edge of sentimentality without falling over. So maybe you're right, Laurent. Maybe just a little bit of humor, hopefully gentle humor, rescues the poem from being overly sentimental, but I don't want to banish all of that sentimentality at the same time.
Okay, and for you, David, listening to you read these haikus, read without interruption, makes me wonder, were you tempted to write a long list poem with the same cadence and attention to syllable count? Talk about putting incongruous thoughts together.
You know, I was thinking about how to respond to Trump's presidency after it was over, and there was a little kind of sigh of relief. And I initially started writing these poems that were 15 lines long, one for every month in his presidency, but that just seemed to kind of, there was too much happened in a month in a Trump presidency. So I cut it down to the haiku. And once I did that, I think I was actually thinking just in terms of haiku. So I would go back and reread the news for that particular week and try and find that moment or that quote or that image that seemed to sum it up. But you're right, Laurent. I mean, you could almost see these as single lines running across the page. And this is the first time I've read them all like this myself aloud. It's an interesting and kind of depressing experience.
All right, you guys are all on. If you'd like, feel free to join in this discussion here. I think everybody's out. If you're not promoted to panelist, please let me know. Did anybody want to add to the discussion, please? And Paul and David, have you looked at the Q&A questions here? There's some really nice thoughts, such as Ron Alexander wrote, "Thank you, both of you, for the sweet reading of your thoughtful poems. David in particular, thank you for the final poem to Andre. Really moved me, made me remember her presence in my life." Several other people actually had chimed in about Andre too, so they were very touched by that poem, David.
Yeah, thank you. And I know, Ron and I, mostly Ron, helped put together a chapbook of Andre's poems. I should say all Ron. And it's interesting because if you move to Santa Barbara after Andre passed, 2013 on, you have no idea who we're talking about. But if you were here, even for the, I don't know what it was, Ron, probably 5-6 years at the most that Andre was here, she was such a gentle soul, and she was always, she loved poetry and those butterflies. I still have my butterfly that and when I hold it, I just can't help but start crying, because she was just a really good person, and she was obviously taken way too early.
David, I remember Sharon and I visiting Andre in the hospital near the end for her. Those were tender moments. Yeah, she wanted me to pray, so I did, even though I don't know that we shared the same faith exactly, but that in itself was a tender thing. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Is there anybody who would like to join the conversation here? Please raise your hand and we can get you out here. I think everybody seems a little bit shy. Oh, Lauren, please feel free. Go ahead and turn on your microphone and camera. Or we'll make you a co-host, Laura. Okay. There you are. Hello.
Good. Hello. I can't see me, but I guess you can see me. I wanted to chime in with Andre because I had just arrived in Santa Barbara. My husband, the poet Kurt Brown, and I had just landed in Santa Barbara, and she welcomed us as if we were family, and with such generous and tender passion for poetry and for the poets in our community. And she spoke about David and Chris and Paul and George and so many others, you know, and said, you'll be fine here, you'll be fine. So it's good at a moment like this to honor a poet who's no longer with us. But I did want to thank David and Paul for their reading, because there's also, I guess, I don't know why I have that term tender, but there's also a tender love for humanity in you both, except of course for Trump. Thank you. So I want to thank you for that also. And I was very moved by your reading. It's odd because I can't see myself right now. I mean, but I hope you hear me. So thank you for the reading.
And we also had a question from George Atchison, another fine writer in town here. George, did you want to come on, or did you want to? I can read your question as well. He'd like both you, Paul, and David to discuss what they most appreciate about each other's work. Oh, there's George. Hi, George.
Well, I can start telling you what I appreciate about Paul's work.
There you go.
You know, I have known Paul almost since I got here to Santa Barbara 21 years ago. And I just love, you know, Paul writes a lot about the natural world. He's out in the natural world a lot. And you would think that after 21 years that, you know, you would start to feel, well, he's just doing the same old thing. But I feel like every time I read a new Paul Willis poem that is set, you know, in the Sierras or somewhere around here, that I'm having a new experience. And it's I think in large part due to the fact that he's so insistent on the details of the landscape and the details of what he's hearing and smelling and seeing, that he can name the specific plants and trees that are around him. And you know, so I when Paul and I are in a workshop together, I usually have one or two or three little word things that I want him to address, but I'm always just wowed by each new poem that he brings in. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop.
Okay.
Well, David, I have read both these recent books, and the haiku are exceedingly clever, of course. But in the book, the Dance, You Monster, it's divided into sections. The two sections I enjoyed the most, I told you, were that there some sections of they're autobiographical about growing up in Sacramento, and they're often hard poems. I mean, there's you can grow up in the best part of town, and you're honest about that. Well, it's interesting. They are autobiographical, which is a little bit of an exception for you because you're so good at making stuff up. And I don't tend to fictionalize too much in your poems, but you write these heartbreaking poems, and then I'll inquire about the experience behind them, and then you'll say, well, it never happened. And I always think, how does he do that? But I also thought the section of elegies, and I'm so glad you ended with that one on Andre, but there are many, many other fine elegies in David's book that will just break your heart. So I think there's a wry sense of I would say objections to the world, come out in haiku, but there's a tenderness to use Laurent's word that I appreciate your poems for.
Wow.
Thanks, Paul.
That's very nice. And We should end that. George also said, congratulations, Grandpa and Grandma Sharon. Too. So, but it looks like that's about all the time we have. Both of you, David and Paul, thank you very much. It was an amazing evening. I really appreciate you taking the time to read your words and to share your thoughts with all of us. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Please buy Dance You Monster to My Soft Song and What Just Happened, David's new books, and Paul's book, Somewhere to Follow. And gentlemen, I'll leave the last words to you.
Well, my last words are thank you, Michael, very much. And thank you to Chaucer's Books and to all of you who signed in this evening.
I appreciate it on a Tuesday night at 7 o'clock that you guys are all good friends. And I want to also have a shout out to my son, Stephen, who's watching from Japan right now. Hey, Stephen.
Wow. Konnichiwa, Stephen-san. So everyone, thank you again. Oyasumi nasai. Good night.